All right, we have to bring in the man who has he's accomplished more at 18 years old than I have in many of my 36 years with the excellent coverage he brings to the Five Reasons Sports Network. And when it comes to amazing Miami Heat NBA breakdowns and tactical breakdowns, I can think of no one better on this network or any than Brady Hawk, who joins us now here on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Brady, good afternoon to you, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me on again.
It's my pleasure. And listen, let me start off with what Sean and I were just talking about. Do you consider Lowry, Butler, and Bam, does that meet your criteria to be called a big three?
I'd say it's a top three. I don't know if I'd say it's a big three. I think you need the Duncan Robinsons, you need the PJ Tuckers, you need the guys around them to make uh, them effective. But I do think it's a solid start that you have a top three you can work around. Three guys that share similar skill sets, three guys who defend at a high level, three guys who can play make at a high level, and three guys who score in different ways that they can balance off each other. I don't think it's as much of a weird fit as others would be. I think they fit in pretty well. They seem to have chemistry off the floor. It just seems it would be a top three. I don't know if I'd be so quick to call it a big three until we see it in action.
And well said. And by the way, people are echoing your sentiment on the chemistry. The chemistry is so important. And, you know, Lowry and Jimmy have wanted to play together. And I think that's a big thing here. Give me some insight on the piece that you just published this morning at Five Reasons Sports about what the Heat are going to look like offensively with Lowry and PJ Tucker. What are you seeing there in terms of potency, floor spacing? How do you think this is going to work out, Brady?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it gives Erik Spoelstra options. I think that's where I start. We talk about him benefiting with Bam. He hits him with the pocket pass. He can get him in spots to score and play make. He fits in with Jimmy. It's another downhill threat, another playmaker for him to play off the ball a little bit more. But more importantly, Spoelstra has an extra option he can put in different spots. He can put Bam and Jimmy in different spots and have the ball in Lowry and trust it. Trust him to run sets through him. In that piece, that was some of the stuff I was hitting on. I think more stuff with Bam hitting him downhill, not just the pocket pass, even though I, kind of harp on that, but there's some things that he can throw over the top. They can mix some stuff in with Jimmy screening, with Duncan screening. And as much as people don't like the dribble handoff, it's got a bad rep because of Bam kind of overusing it at times. It's going to be used when you have Kyle Lowry, who led the league in points per possession with the handoff, and you have Duncan Robinson, who's basically a staple of the dribble handoff. It's going to be used. And they're going to have to use it even more. They're just going to probably have to expand it a little bit more. It's not going to be as simple. They can work stuff off the ball. And we're talking about the offense. I think the big thing with PJ Tucker compared to others is that he's not just a floor spacer like past fours that they've had. It's not just a guy you could stick on the perimeter and just have roam around. He's a guy you could put in the dunker spot down low on the box. You could have him control the interior. It just seems it gives them more flexibility than past fours is what I would probably say.
And I love the breakdown offensively because I think that's something people were a little bit less clear on. Whereas defensively, I don't know how anyone debates that the Heat are now better, right? I mean, because now, you look at the lineup, the Heat can run down in crunch time. And I just have to wonder, how are teams going to score against these guys?
Yeah, I think the issue last season we always came back to was the point of attack. You got your point of attack defender now in Lowry. Trevor Ariza, in some ways, saved their point of attack defense to an extent. They were sticking them on the Stephen Currys, the Kyrie Irvings, the Damian Lillards. Your power forward was guarding opposing point guards, which is not ideal. Now you have your point guard defender. What I was kind of saying about a four is you want to size up instead of size down in that position. PJ Tucker is that guy. He can guard fives, he can guard fours. He's a guy that can guard the post pretty well. It just seems like they have the tools now to benefit Bam especially. Defensively, I know people always didn't like to see him on the perimeter when a guard was guarding a big. When you have Kyle Lowry, he's going to fight through screens where you're not going to have to worry about that as often. And I think the biggest thing about Bam in these new defenders is he's always in the action on defense, where you're always having to put him in there to kind of guard both guys and contain. I think we see more of him off the ball as a freelancer, where that's where he thrives, as a help guy, where he can tag, where he can close out. That's where he's at his best. When he's free on both sides of the ball, that's where he'll truly thrive.
Brady Hawk is with us here on Donno Daily, 5 hour live on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Yesterday was a super busy day. It wasn't only the new additions, also the big extension for Duncan Robinson. Brady, I will admit, at the early part of last season, I'm a little bit embarrassed now about how I was screaming from a mountaintop about wanting, to trade Duncan Robinson basically for whoever. He won me over later in the year. How essential do you think he is for what Spoelstra is trying to accomplish here?
Well, yeah, for one, they were going after Lowry at the deadline, and now they have Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson, where Toronto was basically wanting Duncan Robinson in return. So that's a win right there. Getting him at 18 million, where there were some reports about him going up to 23, 24. That's an absolute steal as well. But from a basketball standpoint, I think it makes everything much more functional with fit moving forward. We could talk about the guys like DeRozan as a possibility. Those aren't possibilities if you don't have Duncan Robinson. Like, Duncan Robinson is the guy on offense that creates the spacing, that creates the offense to make everything work. I think there is some expansion to be done, that he's focused this offseason much more on his body, he said, much more on, trying to work the mid-range a little bit more. And if he even has a little bit more expansion to his game, and with the same consistency from beyond the arc, it's a pretty it's a pretty complete player. Eric Spoelstra is very comfortable with using Duncan Robinson. He's basically his guy. He's probably the guy that was probably yelling to keep Duncan Robinson when you were yelling to try to trade him. That just seems like that's what Eric Spoelstra does. That's his guy that he can work through. And as much as they're going to try to expand Bam's game, it just seems like they're going to continue the things that Duncan's doing and kind of move forward with it.
By the way, I wanted to we got some questions coming in on the chat before we get into what the next moves could be, because I want to make sure we touch on that with Brady. But Anthony Manzano wrote in, Brady, with us adding Kyle Lowry, do you think it's going to push Bam Adebayo's development a lot further, like what happened with DeAndre Ayton when the Suns got Chris Paul?
Actually, I think it's going to be the complete opposite. I think it makes him much better player right now, if that's what the question was. It's means that he can thrive at the moment. If you're pushing his development forward without a point guard, it just makes his job a lot harder. You got Goran, him trying to find other guys. He was looking for handoffs because he was trying to create offense for others. He's always going to create offense for others. He's an unselfish player. He's a straight playmaker. He'll always be that. But you don't want him to have to be the only guy on the roster with Jimmy Butler that can do that job. Now you have a real point guard. You have a guy that he can put in different spots with PJ Tucker, as I mentioned. Putting PJ Tucker in different spots means you can put Bam in different spots. I think people are harping on him kind of trying to expand his range to the three-point line, which would be, the development many would want. But I kind of see it kind of taking a little bit more time. I think it's going to be more, with Kyle Lowry especially, more of a mid-range game, more of consistency from the mid-range. I think that's much more important than anything for his development as a pure player, maybe not from a team perspective, but for him. If he can master the mid-range, the elbow, the baseline, that will be perfect for him. So I would say Kyle Lowry adding to this team is definitely going to be beneficial for the short term.
I love it. Great answer. So earlier, you mentioned the name DeMar DeRozan. Do you think that's still in play here, Brady? What could the next moves be for Miami, given obviously you've already shelled out a lot of money, and this is where the Andy Ellisberg cap gymnastics come into play?
Yeah, right. So there's still some of that mid-level exception. That's what everybody's kind of harping on. You could try to get a guy you could either plug in at the starting four, maybe a guy you could plug in as a backup to PJ Tucker if you want to go that route. Rudy Gay was a guy I've kind of touched on. He kind of just went to the Jazz, so that's off the market. The one guy that I've seen that has been offered and is Markieff Morris. I don't know if that's a type of option that they'd want. Obviously, it is if they extended it, but I'd see him more as the backup guy. I think fits the mold of this team's toughness, physicality. You see the Dedmons, the Lowrys, the Tuckers, all of those guys are just basically just the same model in different forms. So that kind of makes sense. In terms of DeRozan, it feels like if anybody can do it, I think we say this all the time, it's going to be Andy Ellisberg. He'll try to figure this out. There are some different routes people have mentioned with nuns and sign-in trades. Maybe convincing Lowry to take a little bit less, but it just seems like the sign and trade route is going to be the way. And for the people that talk about spacing with DeRozan, I just don't see that as an issue, whatsoever. If you can get DeRozan, first of all, you get him and you worry about that later. That's just first of all. But the second thing is that I think it's a little over harped on that you can't make it work with 3 non-shooters. When you just have a guy like DeRozan who just averaged 22 points per game last season, you can make that work. You can have a guy like Butler take a little bit of a step back in a role that he would probably much rather. I just think you worry about that later. I don't think it's that, big of a deal. And if you could pull it off, maybe they start him at the 4, as people have mentioned. Maybe you have him as a 6-man. Either way, that's a perfect, type of guy to have for a next run.
I'm so glad you mentioned the name Dwayne Dedmon, because I'm kicking myself that when I started off the show and I mentioned the moves that were made and the players who were staying and going, I don't know why I neglected to mention Dwayne Dedmon. I fell in love with him last year for the brief time we saw him in a Heat uniform. And Brady, I'm glad that little love affair is going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, he was the MVP of their playoff series.
Yeah.
He was the only one that was there being effective through all 4 games. He was fighting through it. I said yesterday, I think that was the best signing of the day. Like, they needed that signing. If you looked at the market for backup bigs, I don't think there was one that was going to be as good as Dwayne Dedmon, fit-wise, physicality-wise, role-wise. He's a guy that's going to accept his role. We saw a little bit of him next to Bam Adebayo. Maybe we see, a little bit more of that. But mostly you can trust him in the non-Bam minutes to be effective, to rebound the ball, and score at the rim, because he showed to be very efficient around the rim. And I think that's a guy you want on the interior. That's a very good deal to make, a minimum contract as well. It just seems like they're trying to fill out their bench in a certain way, and a good way to start is retaining, Dwayne Dedmon.
Brady, knowing that the Heat are not completely done and the rest of the East and the rest of the NBA are also not completely done, to be fair, but do you see what Riley is building right now? I think we can agree the Heat are getting better and have gotten better, but how much better? Do you think they're trending towards becoming a contender, at least in the East?
Oh, yeah. I think they are becoming a contender in the East. I think you got an upgrade at point guard. I heard you touching on the Goran Dragic subject. I just don't see, as much as I'm a big fan of Goran Dragic and what he's done with Miami, I just don't see a part of his game that he was better at than Kyle Lowry. I just think that's a major upgrade defensively, playmaking, shooting, all of the above. It's just a major upgrade. PJ Tucker is a better fit than the Trevor Ariza was. Now that you have, as I mentioned before, the point of attack defense, you have a bigger guy down low. The part that we're going to have to be watching is the bench. Who they add with the mid-level, who they get as a backup point possibly. Do they get back Victor Oladipo? Those are the questions to be had. And I think they kind of knew they were going in this direction anyways, because if you look at their summer league roster, it was kind of trending toward that way of adding 8 point guards who have this similar type of build. All guys who can defend, all guys who can run your offense a bit. They've had success with undrafted guys in the past. As much as people probably don't want to see a guy straight out of college being your backup point guard or contender, that's probably the Heat way. They trust in guys like that. Could it be Gabe Vincent? Could it be a guy that shines starting tonight in Summer League? I think it could be one or the other.
Brady, when we last spoke about a week ago, you and I were both very iffy on Team USA basketball in the Olympics, whether or not they can win a gold. Now, they did advance past Spain very, very late last night. I relied on watching highlights because I'm old and washed, and I've already sent the thank you card to Kevin Durant for really bailing out Team USA. He was fantastic and super necessary in that victory. So has your opinion changed? Because I think your answer to me a week ago, and I agreed with you, when I asked you if USA is going to win the gold, you said probably not. So are you looking at it differently now?
I feel like there's a point that they just have to make shots. Like, that's what it comes down to. If you're watching these games, they're getting good looks. They're creating good looks. When that wasn't the case probably a week ago when I said probably not, I'd probably lean more to the probably, because I trust these NBA level guys to make open threes, even though it's not their role in the NBA. They're more on-ball guys playing in off-ball roles now. It just feels like they just have to make their open shots from 3 early on. It feels like if they capitalize on that, that wouldn't have been in the spot that they were in. They have to defend at a higher level. But it seems like they have the rotation down finally. They have the offense running smoother than it was a week ago, where I probably lean more to the probably and than the probably not.
Well said. And hey, like you see it on the screen there, whether you're watching us live or you're watching on replay, make sure you smash that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the 5 Reasons Sports YouTube channel. But the likes go a long way. And make sure you let people know we do these live shows every single weekday from noon to 1 p.m. And we bring on great people like Brady Hawk to talk about the Heat and talk about the Dolphins and Canes and all the local teams. And make sure you guys follow Brady and follow his work. In fact, I would say for any Heat fan, couple of must reads on 5reasonsports.com right now. The piece Brady wrote yesterday about DeMar DeRozan and floor spacing and debunking that myth a little bit, which I appreciated, and his piece from today about PJ Tucker and Kyle Lowry and how they will affect the Heat offensively. So make sure you check that out and follow Brady. Brady, thank you so much for the time, my friend, and enjoy the rest of this offseason whirlwind.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.